There we go. Computer updates made me have to restart. Sorry about that. Everybody here is a little bit early, but that's great. We'll get started a couple minutes after time. I usually give people just a few so they can join. But in the meantime, I'll post this, and if you want to go ahead and find a link, the chat in the toolbar, which you can find in your Zoom toolbar. It might be under the 3 dots that says more, depending on your screen. Let me know who you are, what you teach, and if you feel comfortable sharing one thing you are grateful for today, since I always find it's never a bad thing to share a few positive moments. So you can go ahead and let me know in the chat. I'll kick it off and we'll get started in a few minutes. Welcome, Jenna. Welcome, Leo. If you are just joining, we're just taking a few moments before we get started to introduce ourselves in the chat. Welcome, Julia. And if you want to throw your name, what you teach, and one thing that you are grateful for in there, that'd be awesome. And we'll get started close to on time, maybe a minute or two after, just to give some people a little bit of a grace period. Welcome, Eddie. Welcome, Novia. And Novia, I'm wondering if you finished writing a book or reading one. Welcome, Leo. Welcome, Erasmo. Welcome, Cynthia. These are some great reminders of things to always be grateful for. Things like being able to continue another year, things like being able to have a stable job, workplace, home, food, definitely great reminders. So if you are just joining, wanted to say hello. We're introducing ourselves in the chat. We'll get started probably in 1 to 2 minutes since it's 2:15 right now. Well, it's earlier where you are. It's have a quarter past wherever we are. So we'll go ahead and just continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'll get started in 1 or 2 minutes. But let me know who you are, what you teach. If you feel comfortable sharing something you're grateful for right now, it's just always helpful to start with that in mind. Welcome, Adela. Welcome, Minu. Welcome, Christina, Bianca, Jacqueline, Susan, Katie. Thank you very much for introducing yourselves in the chat. It is now 17 after, so we're going to launch into the session. Good morning, Sarian. So I'll just start by introducing myself, and then we'll get into the actual meat of the session. We'll talk about how to communicate. I am recording, just so you know, so don't feel like you have to write every single thing down. This recording will be shared so that you can access it later, and so that if you want to share with colleagues or if you want to review later on in the year, you'll be able to do that. Hello. David, hello Amber, hello Molly and Catherine, welcome, we're excited to have you. So my name is Ellen and I'm a professional learning manager here at Newsela. I've worked here for 3 years doing webinars to train teachers on how to use Newsela across the country. I used to do in person as well, but that's not really something that's happening right now. So we're mainly focused on connecting virtually. But it sets me up well to be talking about how to speak to teachers in a virtual classroom and how that can translate into a classroom environment as well. So we're going to be talking about how to use Newsela in an inquiry-based context, particularly in secondary, although a lot of the strategies you'll be able to translate even if you are not a secondary teacher. So really excited to be able to meet with you all today and to be able to be a part of this journey with you. So here's what we're going to talk about. It's a lot on the agenda, but we are going to try and make sure we pause to provide time for you all to actually put this into practice and to make sure you're set up for success with Newsela as well. We want to talk about inquiry. We want to talk about the pedagogical aspect of it, but we also want to make sure you have the basics down. You can access Newsela, you're able to get on the site, you're able to move around, find things that you need. So we'll try and accomplish both those goals as we go through this session today. You all at SFUSD have a subscription to Newsela Essentials. So that's the framework that we'll be talking about. That is one of our 4 subject area products that allows you access to different content that we have. So we'll be using those resources to form assignments and tasks through a C3 inquiry framework that focus on leveraging those type of skills, that type of questioning, so your students can get the benefit of that thinking method alongside the content that we have to offer as well. To do that, we're actually going to go into an experience. So we're going to take a look at some Newsela articles with kind of both hats on. We're going to be thinking as teachers, but also as students. So we'll get to actually go through a practice Newsela assignment to see how the other half experiences this. We'll do a little modeling with how to create some text sets, and ultimately we're going to want to leave with an actual assignment that you have crafted. I don't like stick to an agenda, with a death grip. I like to be a little bit flexible. So, if you have questions that come up, or we want to spend a little bit more time on one piece of this than another, that's totally fine. I just want to make sure that this is a useful session for all of you. I want to make sure that you leave able to use this in your classroom, and you feel like it's a tool you can call on throughout this very unique year we're about to look at. I know that SFUSD is a really kind of ahead of the game in incorporating technological tools into their classrooms, and we know that this year is going to be more important than ever. So I was a teacher, I was a 5th grade writing teacher, and I use Newsela in my classroom, and all I want is that for people who are in my sessions to also feel like they see the value of it and they can call on it when they need it. So that's my goal for you all today, and however we can accomplish that, I'm happy to do. If we need to take things in a different direction, that's fine with me. So to that end, I'm going to skip to this slide first, just so we know how to communicate throughout the session. Very important. So I already asked you to introduce yourself in the chat, and part of that is just so you know where the chat is. The chat is a really helpful way for communicating. You are welcome to unmute yourself if you want, and you can ask a question that way. A lot of people like to use the chat because they can kind of park a question there. They don't have to wait for, an opportune moment or a pause in the conversation. You can just, as you think of a question, put it in the chat, and then I'll check there every so often to make sure I can answer anything that's come up. You're more than welcome to unmute, but I know that people work in different ways. So feel free to communicate in either way, and please do ask questions. Don't worry if you feel like, oh, but she might have already said this. Again, I just want this to be useful to you. So whatever you need to know, I'm happy to go over. We're going to start with some very basic things though. So we're going to start by learning how to sign up through Clever. And also I'm going to tell you a little bit about 2 courses that are asynchronous courses that you'll be able to call on after the session later as well. So I'm going to share the links to these in the chat just so you have them. So we have made a video for you so that you know how to use this in the first place. So the video for sign up is right here. But it's very simple, really, how you're going to be able to sign up for Newsela. You're going to sign up through Clever. So if you know what Clever is, it's your platform that allows you to roster multiple education apps at once. If you're not familiar with Clever, that's totally fine too. Let me show you what it's going to look like when you're trying to sign on. So you're going to go to this website right here. So you're going to log on. I'm not gonna play this whole video, but I do wanna show you the beginning. You're going to log into Clever using your SFUSD email and password. So you're going to access the portal at this link, clever.sfusd.edu. And I'll share that in the chat as well. It's clever.sfusd.edu. So you're gonna go to that link and it's gonna look like this page right here. And you can see it says log in with Google. You're just going to log in using your faculty email and password. That's very important. Don't try to log in using like a personal email. It won't work. So all that you'll do is once you get into that, then the next step is that you're gonna see this little Newsela icon, and I'll show you quickly what this looks like. You can see all this in the video, but I'm just telling you what the video says. The next step is just click on the Newsela icon. That's it. And then it'll take you directly into the site. So Clever is a service that SFUSD has that allows this to be possible, that you don't need to go through the whole rigmarole of entering your password and signing up and rostering your students. You don't even have to worry about that. You can just go to this website, clever.sfusd.edu, and as long as you're logged in, you click the Newsela icon and you're good to go, right? So that's how you'll be able to get in if you've never signed into Newsela before. So that video that I shared in the chat will help you do that as well. So if it's still not working for you, still doesn't make sense, take a second, put me on mute or something and just check out that video. It explains what I just said, but you can use it at your own pace. So that's how you're going to be able to access Newsela today. And that's very important because I really try to make sure that you have some time throughout the session, even with all we have to cover, to actually play around in Newsela, because the sessions are boring if it's just me talking the whole time and they don't stick. So after we go through different points, I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to play around yourself so that you can locate the things that I've talked about, so that you can make your own assignments, so that you can employ the strategies that we've discussed. And you can't do that if you're not able to get into the site. So with that in mind, I also wanted to show you, and I'll come back around to this at the end, we also have developed special sessions that are digital asynchronous courses for SFUSD. And so there is a 101 course, they just linked in the chat, and there's also a 201 course, they just linked in the chat. So you don't have to look at these now. They are something that you can do later on, but they're definitely going to be possible for you to review, to go over later. If you have colleagues that haven't gone to the session, you can do these another time, or you can recommend these to them. We just got a question, should we sync classes with Clever or Google Classroom or both? So I'm aware that you all share to Google Classroom, so I'll show you how to share your assignments to Google Classroom. But in terms of rostering, it's going to be easiest, excuse me, for you to roster with Clever. Because if you roster through Google Classroom, there's just a few more steps. If you roster through Clever, like we just did here, you don't even have to do that many clicks. It's really just you sign into Clever, you click the Newsela icon, and you're good to go. Your students are all there. But I will share with you how you can make sure that you share your assignments to Google Classroom as well. So we'll do that when we get to assigning. So that's the startup stuff. If you're having any issues in Newsela, if you're not able to get in for some reason, or you're not seeing the correct information, let me know. So what you should see when you get in is you should see a page that looks like this. It's our home page. It'll load in just a second, and I'll show you how to know that you have the correct permissionings and everything. So our homepage will show you every day the latest news. It's generally going to look something like this, and you'll see the latest articles that we publish right here. We publish new stuff every day. So if you're looking to teach current events, it is absolutely an unparalleled resource for that. Many times I come on the site in the morning and I see the same things I was just hearing about on the news. Used to be during my commute or while I'm getting ready for the day now. So you can double check that you have the correct information. If you float over your initials right here, you should see a subscription product that says Newsela Essentials. It just means that's a subscription that SFUSD has. And so you should see that if you float over your name underneath there. And that just lets you know you have the correct licenses and everything. So that's how you're able to get onto the site. That's the first thing you need to know. And the other thing is that Clever takes care of connecting you to your students. Those are usually the two things I spend time going over in sessions. But we don't have to spend a ton of time on it because it's already kind of taken care of for you by the district. That said, if you're having any issues, if you still can't get in or you log on and you float over your initials and you don't see Newsela Essentials in the drop down, let me know in the chat. When we get a moment where we pause and I give you some time to browse or look around, I'll get my team on it. I'll send them a memo and let them know that someone's having an issue and we can troubleshoot. So if you're still having problems, we're not going to leave you in the dust, but we do want to make sure we can move forward as well. So let me know if there's anything that comes up. So here we are on Newsela. Newsela is an awesome instructional content platform that allows you to bring nonfiction content to your students at a level that is best for them. So some of you might be brand new to Newsela. Some of you may have used Newsela a lot in the past. Either way, we're excited to share with you. And I'd just like to start with a base level of where you are in Newsela and what Newsela Essentials is and what we can do. Great, so I've got a couple people who are letting me know that they're not able to log in. When we take a second to browse around the site, I'll make sure I take a look at your accounts and get some support for you. Okay, so you all have access to Newsela Essentials, and I'll tell you a little bit about what that means. Newsela Essentials allows you to see our news and library content. So we used to call it Newsela Pro. It's now called Newsela Essentials because it gives you all the essentials that you need to teach with Newsela in your classroom. So you can see in the toolbar at the top, there are two main tabs, News and Library. News is where you're going to find what we're most well known for, which is the news category. Newsela really got its start by sharing current events articles with teachers in leveled versions so they could share them with their students. And this is why I started using Newsela as a teacher. It's really, really helpful and really crucial when you want to access current events with your students, to be able to share them with the students at a level that works for them. I used to have colleagues or my coaches who were trying to emphasize rigor in my classroom saying that I should be reading these New York Times articles with my students. And while I understood that, we can close read these together, we can piece them together, we can talk about them, it wasn't practical to use every day, and certainly not practical when students were reading independently with no support. So a resource like Newsela allowed us to talk about current events, but from the perspective and from a version that they could access themselves. Given that there are 5 versions of every article, it's really amazing to be able to talk about things that are happening in the world around us, but are phrased in a way that students can understand. So that's what you can find in the news section. The library section is pretty much everything else. So anything that is a foundational text, an informational text, anything that is more encyclopedic is going to be in the library category. And that's where you're able to find anything that's not current events. We have a ton of information to that end as well. And a lot of people don't always know that. That's not the first thing they think about when they think about Newsela. But we have all kinds of informational texts, explainers, opinion pieces, and those can be found in the library category. So as you're browsing, that's just something to keep in mind. You can look in news for current events, library for foundational texts and more informational texts. You also have this button in your dropdown that says your content. And this is how you can collect and curate things. You'll notice on the site, there are these little bookmark icons. You'll find them on the article page as well. Once you've found something you like, you can click that little flag icon, and you can just make sure that you save this content. And then if you float over your content and you go down to where it says saved, you'll be able to see that article that you've saved. So it's a really helpful way to just keep tabs on things that you find that you might want to use later on or that you really like. So that's kind of a high-level overview of what you can see in Newsela Essentials. We've got a couple comments that we do have articles on Spanish. In Spanish, that is true. We do have articles that are available in Spanish, and you can find these in search. I'll show you in just a second how to do that once I get out of this page. The Spanish articles are some of my favorite things on Newsela, and the best way to find them nowadays is when you're on the site, if you go into where it says search and you're using the search bar, there's a filter in search that allows you to find articles that are available in Spanish. Currently, Spanish is the only language that we support. And the reason for that is we take really strong care to do it at high quality. So we have human translators that go over everything. They translate everything. They translate the quizzes. They translate every level of the article. They translate the right prompt so that the whole experience is in Spanish. And as a result, you can imagine it's a big challenge to do that with every article that we can. So currently we support Spanish, but you can find, if you go to search and then you click into more filters, and Spanish is right here. So if you're looking for articles that are also available in Spanish, you can check this box and click apply. And then you'll see only articles that are also available in Spanish. And when you click into them, you can change the language in the same place that you change the level. So the beauty of it is there are 5 levels in Spanish, which I loved as a teacher because I really think it recognizes the fact that, of course, not all students are coming to you with the same level of Spanish knowledge either. So you can find whatever level is going to be best for your students in Spanish. You can easily switch to English, as can they, if you want to use multiple levels of the article or multiple languages of the article. So this is one of my favorite things to use alongside Newsela, and it's definitely something that I found helpful for my students. We got another question from David. Do Lexile levels adjust automatically? Great question. So excited to be able to share this with you. Yes. So when you first start off using Newsela, the very first time, your students are going to receive the articles at grade level. So in other words, if we've got all, you can see the corresponding grade level underneath the picture. So this is currently, I'm looking at the 950 level of the text, which is a 6th grade version. I go down to like the 700 level, that's a 4th grade version. By default, it's going to go out to your students at the closest level to grade level that is available. So if I teach 5th grade, my students are probably gonna see, yep, the 820 level by default. Once they start taking the quizzes on the article, so after they've read a few Newsela articles and they've taken the quizzes that are here, those quizzes are on every article, the platform will start to learn about them as readers, and it will suggest for them automatically the best version of the article based on their past quiz performance. So in other words, if you've got a 5th grade, we're working with secondary here. So let's say if we've got a 7th grade class, they're gonna start off seeing their articles at 7th grade level. Once they start taking the quizzes, I might have a 7th grade student who finds the 7th grade quizzes really easy. They sail through them every time. The platform will learn that about them. So it'll realize, oh wow, you know, Jose, every time he reads an article, he just speeds through the quiz and he gets 100 every time. Next time he opens up an article, we're gonna try it at the 8th grade level or the 9th grade level. And by default, when Jose opens up an article, that's what he's going to see. He's going to see a harder version. Students don't see the text level correspondence, that doesn't appear for them, but they will be pushed out the more difficult, more advanced version of the text. Conversely, if there's a classmate in that same class who's finding the 7th grade questions really challenging, that student will also have that recognized by the quiz. If they're consistently struggling on the quizzes at the 7th grade level, the platform, the next time they open up an article, might push out to them the 6th grade version or the 5th grade version, because it's recognizing that that's what's going to be best for the student. So yes, the more quizzes the platform has, the more quizzes the student takes, the better that will calibrate. So it'll make a better prediction for the students, but it will individually and automatically differentiate for students, which is one of my favorite things. So student-facing videos, yes, there are. You can find those in the distance learning section of the professional learning page. I'll touch on them at the end. And Bianca's question, is there a way to link articles to Google Classroom? Yes, and I will show you that once we assign an article. So we'll get to those two as we move forward. I'm going to pause for just a second, and I'm going to, one, make sure everybody can get on the site, but two, I'm going to give you a chance to browse through news and library. Since we also got to touch on search, if you want to browse through search as well, that's awesome. You can play around with these filters. You can look for a particular audience or a particular text level, or you can look for articles that are available in Spanish. We're just going to take 1 to 2 minutes, but try and make sure that by the end of this, you've saved at least one article that you really like that you might want to make an assignment with. And you can save that by clicking on that flag icon here, or it's also located underneath the title of the article. You'll see that flag icon there as well. So once you've saved something, it appears in the Your Content dropdown under Saved by You. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. That way it gives me a chance to answer any outstanding questions that we have, and it also gives you a chance to get your feet wet and take a look around. Let me know if anything comes up during this time. I'm not going anywhere. I just turned my camera off so that you don't feel like I'm watching you, but I'll be here. Let's take about 30 more seconds to explore, and then we'll come back to it. All right, thank you very much for being so communicative as we're fixing a few little snafus. A couple questions that came up. Can we keep students from changing the text level themselves? Great question. By default, students can change the level converter. The idea being we would like them to be aware readers and be able to support themselves by scaling down if they need a little more scaffolding and challenging themselves if they're feeling confident on an article. That said, we know with great power comes great responsibility, and sometimes you might want to make sure they stay at a particular level. When I assign, in addition to showing you how to link to Google Classroom, I will show you how to prevent them from changing the text level. Next question from Michael. When co-teaching, how can the other teacher have access to my content? Co-teachers are listed in Clever, so they should have access to the same classes as you already, and you should be able to see the same students and see the same assignments. If that's not happening because you're using Clever, that's where you have to fix it. You have to make sure you're listed as co-teachers in Clever. And so, I will share that with in just a second, Baga. And fantastic. So, great. So I think we're caught up with most of the questions here. And so we can get into actually talking about the C3 framework and how you can use it within Newsela. We'll do an actual activity as an example, and then we'll get the opportunity to try it out ourselves in making an actual assignment that is based on the articles we want to talk about. So let me share with you my slides here. Back to the slide deck. So one of my favorite ways of using Newsela, one of my favorite teaching strategies, is the inquiry-based framework. I think it's so powerful to have questions driving our investigation, and Newsela is an awesome resource for that, for lots of reasons. One is because there's such a wealth of information that is already vetted and ready for you to use. All of the information that is on Newsela comes from our partnerships with real news sources. So almost all of our content comes from sources like the Associated Press, the Miami Herald, the LA Times. These are real news sources that adults read in their everyday lives, and we just have partnerships with them that allow us to rewrite and adapt what they've written so that it's easier for younger readers to access. And that means that everything that you're looking at comes from a place that's already trusted. It's already out there in the world, and it's real. It's not something that was manufactured just for a classroom or a textbook and not something you would see anywhere else. It's a living, breathing thing. And so what's cool about using Newsela is that as your students develop these questions, as they're wondering about things, we're going to focus mostly on assigning articles, but keep in mind that they have access to all the articles that we have access to. So one of the things you can also have them do is just explore and use Newsela and the wealth of data that's there to investigate the answers to the questions they have themselves, with you knowing you're going to find reliable answers. So I know you all are invested in the C3 inquiry framework, and I just pulled up the inquiry design model as an example of some of the things that we're going to touch on today. So the C3 inquiry framework is a really compelling way of driving your lessons toward a question and toward using the sources that you have in pursuit of an answer to that as well. So we can start, and you'll see we have an example of in the next activity we're going to do with a compelling question. It kind of centers us and grounds us in what we're trying to figure out about the topic we're covering. We have, in this example, we'll have like 2 supporting questions. You may have more, but that's another thing that you can kind of use to build up to the compelling question. And then, of course, one of the key roles Newsela can play in your inquiry design model is a featured source. As you're going about trying to answer these questions, Newsela can be that place where you start to observe, to look for answers, to find more questions, to get to the next step. because we have all kinds of things. We have informational texts, but we also have primary sources. And these can be great places to go with your questions in mind, so that students can start to analyze these texts and then develop questions of their own or answer questions that you're coming together around as a class as well. So we're going to be looking at an example in US history. So as this is a secondary focus session, we wanted to pull a topic that comes up in secondary classrooms a lot. I know US history is one of the most common requests I get from teachers about. So we're going to focus on an example from a US history classroom, but keep in mind, this could be adapted for all kinds of ways. It does not have to be social studies. You could do an inquiry in a science classroom as well. You can do an inquiry in an ELA classroom. You can do, I've seen math inquiries with Newsela done as well. So there are lots of different ways you can go about this. We're going to focus on this one example, but keep in mind, it's not relegated just to this example. There are lots more resources for how you can apply C3 framework in different places. It comes up a lot in social studies, but the inquiry-based method in general can be used in lots of places. So we want to start with a compelling question, and C3 offers these. They come up with them in their units. And they define those questions by needing to be worth investigating from an academic angle, but also worth exploring from a student angle. So they have to be advanced questions that are really going to get us to a deep place about this topic, to really deep understanding, but also something that makes sense in the student's pathway. So something that they can naturally kind of feel around, try different things, make observations that lead to more questions. So that's definitely something we want to keep in mind as we're thinking about the compelling question we're going to investigate. We're going to be trying this out on the topic of the Great Depression. And so I'm going to be sharing with you in just a second a text set that we're going to be using to answer this, and an article that we're going to be looking at as well, with this particular question in mind. And that compelling question, which comes from the C3 units, is, was the New Deal a good deal? We will look at kind of multiple perspectives on this, but the idea is that when you look at multiple Newsela texts with this question in mind, you can pull out different things and discuss as a class. And you can break this down however you'd like. You can have the whole class read the same articles. You can divide it up, jigsaw, have some students read one article, some students read another. But with these complex, compelling questions and the multiple Newsela texts you can bring to them, you can really get in deep and get to multiple facets of this question rather than just approaching it from one perspective. So this contributes to our ability to construct, address, and pursue arguments then. So not only are we focusing on this as a content area topic, but we're also developing our ability to develop these arguments and present evidence in support of them as we go. So we're going to actually put our student hat on. Of course, we also have our teacher hat on the whole time, but we're going to take a look at some Newsela texts and think as students. What do we notice about this text in relation to our compelling question? So remember, our question is, was the New Deal a good deal? Some supporting questions we might have include, what connections can you make between the conditions during the Great Recession and today? And does history repeat itself? These are some really big questions that are particularly relevant right now, and definitely something that would make this type of lesson matter even more for our students who are looking for those connections to why we learn about this in the first place. My students always ask me that. And when you do an inquiry, this is part of what makes it come alive, is how you ask those compelling and supporting questions or relate them to real life can make it all the more worthwhile. So one thing I wanted to share before we get into this, in just a second, I'm going to link to the article and show you how to share it. But one thing I wanted to let you know, if you want to follow along on the slides, that's totally fine. If you want to follow along in your actual Newsela account on the article and you want to do the activity there, you're totally welcome to do that too. One of the things that you can do in Newsela that might help your own reading experience right now and might help your students' reading experience as well when they participate in a similar activity is annotations. So annotations can be done on any Newsela article, really simple to do. All you have to do is click and drag over a section of text. And when you release the mouse, you'll see the color change. Okay, so here we are on the text we're going to look at. If you want to highlight it, all you have to do is click and drag over a section of text. You release the mouse. You see these 4 colors that you can choose from. You can pick whichever one's your favorite. And then you can write something to your students. So we can say, what does this opening line tell us about the authors? Right? So we can start that way and make sure that we have a way of organizing information as we go. So like I said, I promised I would share this article with you, so I'm about to drop it in the chat. If you want to follow along on the slide, that's totally fine. I will put up the selection on the slide if you want to look at it there. But you can also, if you'd rather just click the link and open up the article in Newsela, you can also look at it there. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to actually look over this selection of text. If you're finding it yourself from the link that I shared, it's this paragraph that starts, WPA laborers and skilled trade workers. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read the selection and think as you go about this compelling question. Was the New Deal a good deal? This is from the article, The WPA, Did It Cure the Great Depression? This is a US history article that is contained within Newsela Essentials. You can keep in mind the supporting questions as you go too, but we're driving towards that one compelling question. I'm going to give you a few minutes to take a look at this, draw some conclusions, and then in a second, I'll give you an opportunity to share. You can feel free at that time, once I open up the floor, to share by unmuting your microphone. You'll also be able to share in the chat if that's more comfortable for you, but we'll make sure that everybody gets the opportunity. So I'm setting the timer for 2 minutes. Go ahead and take a look at this text. You can either look at the screen or you can pull up the article yourself. We've got about 30 seconds left. We'll have an opportunity to look at more of a larger selection in just a second. Let's start synthesizing your thoughts. Okay, so I'm going to move to a slide where I can take some notes. And now you'll see me out of present mode so I can add to it. But I would love to hear either through unmuting or through the chat what your thoughts are. Based on reading that selection, what did you think? Was the New Deal a good deal? Or was it not a good deal? So right now we're just providing some sharing time. If you want to be typing out your answer in the chat, that's awesome. If you want to unmute yourself and just share what your thoughts are about the compelling question based on the text we just read, you can also choose to do that. Great question. So I'll address that in just a second. Kristen says, it was a good deal because it created a centralized, organized response to a national crisis. When we say that, Leo asks, when we say the New Deal, are the programs presented at the beginning, including Conversation Core Public Works? Yes, so this particular article references some things that were involved in the second New Deal, and that's totally fine. Yes, we are including those things in this particular discussion. So we know that these things were that the New Deal was a good deal because it created a centralized, organized response to a national crisis. I'm curious to see what particular line from the text draws us that conclusion. Yeah, I hate when my students say this, but yes and no. Yes, it was a good deal for those needing to reinvent their jobs and help those in need, as it says in the last paragraph. It was not a good deal those who lost their jobs and had to expand even more labor for no purpose, right? So this is part of what we get when we're exploring complex, compelling questions. A lot of the C3 questions are structured this way, where it's a binary. And part of that is because they're hard to answer. It's a lot more nuanced than just being able to say yes or no at first glance. But it's definitely something that is thought-provoking. We kind of want to force students to take a side. And even if they are taking both sides, even if they are saying yes or no, being able to back up their answers with information from the text. And that's something we see a lot too, is we want to make sure, I know a lot of us know other things about the New Deal, but for the purposes of right now, we want to focus on what we see in this selection, because that's what we're going to want our students to do. We want them to be looking at the text itself and be able to point to the line that directs them to think in a particular way. So now we're kind of cooking with gas here. We've got lots of thoughts. Adela says it was a good deal because it created infrastructure that we rely on today. So we do see some references to that infrastructure, thousands of public buildings, schools and hospitals, city halls, courthouses, in the first paragraph here. Michelle says it was good because it helped create jobs during a time of economic crisis, although maybe poorly executed, right? So in the second paragraph, they talk about how some people had this perception that the WPA didn't actually do a lot, and they made fun of it. But we know that the third paragraph kind of reinforces where we got all this infrastructure and all these other programs that came from it. We've got some comments. The New Deal was good, creating many jobs during an era where there was economic hardship. And I love this because we have a follow-up question. Someone is asking, I wonder though how people of color fared within the system. What a great question. Yeah, and that's what should happen when we're doing an inquiry-based lesson. And C3 has these questions they want us to hit on, but part of a great inquiry-based lesson is that it's going to lead to students asking more questions and thinking through next steps. I thought about women in particular as well. So it has this women's and professional projects division, and I kind of wondered, well, what were the results of that actually? Or we had these adult education classes, and I'm wondering, where did those actually lead? What were the results? So Jennifer is saying, based on this portion, it was a good deal because it built buildings for schools. Great point. We're keeping in mind this whole time that we're only looking at a single section of a single article. So it's not going to give us the full picture of what's going on with the New Deal. But when we look at this in the context of other Newsela articles, when we look at this in the context of a jigsaw or with students bringing multiple pieces from multiple articles that they've read together, we can start to build a more conclusive picture based on evidence that we actually have. Doctors and nurses inoculated flood victims. We've got a comment, it was a bad deal because it took a long time to plan the projects, and during that time, lots of people suffered and the economy was in shambles. That is something that the rest of this article goes into, absolutely. It was a good deal because both rules were designed to put money in the hands of people who needed it the most and therefore would spend it most quickly, funneling money into the economy. That looks like a quote from the actual text, which is awesome. That's what we want. So fantastic. This is what we're going for. We're making sure that in the context of this particular compelling question, we're drawing from the text to start to develop some answers. And they're not going to be simple answers. But that's part of what makes a compelling C3 inquiry. And then we're going to take it, we won't actually, because of time, get to go to this next step, but this is where we would naturally take it as teachers next. And that is to actually getting into other texts. So I'm going to share the text set with you that this comes from, just so you have it in case you want to draw on it. But this article comes from a group of articles that are contained within Newsela Essentials. And if you just search New Deal in Newsela and you look for text sets, you'll be able to see this. So I just put it in the chat and it's available to everybody. But it's this text set right here, FDR's New Deal and Government as a Problem Solver. So you can see it kind of gives you a description of the texts that are contained within it, and it has lots of different sections for addressing this question. So the idea is very much that you don't have to relegate your inquiry into one particular article. You can do that, you can start there, but then you definitely have the resources with Newsela to build it out further. So you're able to look into, this overarching article about the overall history of the New Deal. That might be a really great resource to look at. There's a primary source from FDR himself. You can look at that and get his perspective on what he was rolling out. This is the article that we just read, the WPA, Did It Cure the Great Depression? Here's the famous speech I was just mentioning. There are a few more articles on examples of New Deal programs, and these are primary sources. This question that Faga had, this is actually directly related to the follow-up that you were thinking about. How did this affect people of color? We can look at this example, A Black New Yorker Describes Life in a CCC Camp. This would be a great next step. So what I want to show you before we go, we have 9 minutes left. I want to make sure we cover this because it relates to a lot of people's other questions. I want to show you how to actually assign an article or a group of articles to students. As I mentioned, this is not the only way to use Newsela. You can definitely have students search and browse the same way that we did. But many teachers want to be able to let students know what article they're going to be discussing today or share a particular article with students. So to do that, you can do that from a text set or you can do it from a single article. If we want to share a text set, let's go into this one. You're going to click this button that says Create Assignment. It's a blue button in the upper right-hand corner. For some reason, it shows up saying Create Assignment when it's multiple articles. On a single article, it just says Assign. And these give you the same, they take you the same place. They just are worded differently for multiple articles versus one article. I don't know why. So when you click Assign or Create Assignment, you're taken to this page where you can set up your assignment. So you can change the title if you'd like. You can select your classes. These will be set up for you within Clever. That's part of the reason it's so great. We had a question about how you can lock the level of the article so students can't change it. On this page is where you can do that. So you see where it says text level. You can click Adjust Level if you'd like to be able to change the text level for students and make sure that they have to read at a particular level. So if you don't want it to be personalized to each individual student and you want it to be available at a certain level, you can lock it. So if I teach 7th grade and I want everyone to read this at the 7th grade version, I can click grade 7 and then click Lock Selection to lock it. And then they will not be able to change that version. This I think is most helpful if you are doing something like a whole class read aloud, because it will mean that everybody sees the same level and it does override the personalized automatic personalization that we talked about before. But it will prevent them, they have to take the quiz at the grade level that you set before they can see the other version. So if that's a concern for you, that's how you can address that. The next thing that you can do is you can fill in the instructions right here. You can say whatever you like. So this is a great place to put your compelling question. You can say, was the new deal a good deal? You can ask students to highlight details that answer your question. You can give them a particular color if you'd like. You can ask them to highlight a follow-up question, but you can let them know how you want them to engage in this space right here. When you're ready, you can either save this as a draft, which means it's not going to go out to your students just yet, but it'll be ready for you when you want to assign it, or you can click assign and share it with students immediately. So whichever you want to do, I'm going to go ahead and just assign it, and that means my students will already see it. Once you have assigned, this is where this question came up before, and I promised I would get to it. This is where you can share to Google Classroom. So if you click this little arrow right here, and you share as a link with students to Google Classroom, you can do that right in this space. That will mean that you'll be taken through the process of making this an assignment on your Google Classroom class. You do need to do that. It's not going to automatically show up as an assignment on your Google Classroom stream. So if you want this to show up, you do have to click share as a link to students through Google Classroom, but you will be able to do that there. I wanted to address one other question we had from someone about the highlights and who sees those. If you highlight as a teacher, it will show up for your students and they'll be able to see what you wrote and reply to it. If you highlight as a student, and students can do the same thing, they highlight the same way, you're the only one that can see their highlights, and you can see this in the binder under the assignments tab. Great question. We've got a couple other questions that came in. One was, can you assign different levels to different students? The best way to accomplish that goal is just to use the default and make sure that students they're taking the quizzes, so they're getting those personalized suggestions of the article. There's no way to lock it yet at their individual level. If you really want to get into it, what you can do to kind of get that effect is you can create classes in the back end in your settings tab. So you could go to here and under settings. You could create classes for your small groups. So you could create a class for all the students you want to be reading at the 7th grade level. You could create a class for all the students you want to be reading at the 3rd grade level. And you could lock those classes. But because the assignments are made class-wide, they're not made by individual student. So the only way to get around that is to make your own classes the way you would want to assign articles. We had a question, how do you archive or delete previously created classes? This is in the same spot. So if you go to your settings tab and you go down to where it says classes, you can just archive any classes that you don't need. They'll be saved in your archived classes, so if you make a mistake, you don't need to worry, but they basically just go into that folder and then you don't see them anymore. Do you need to import your Google Classroom if you already imported the class onto Clever? You should not need to. No, classes are already synced. Can you speak more about the quizzes assessment process? Do we need to assign the quiz? Great question. I get this question a lot. You don't need to quote unquote assign any of the activities. All of the activities will be available on every article that you look at. So for example, if you want students to do the quiz, if you want them to do the right prompt, if you want them to do annotations, those are always just available. There's no way to attach or unattach those activities to the article. That way, it's great too, because then if your students are just browsing, they can complete those activities on their own. They're always available. So what I recommend doing is using the instructions when you assign to focus on what you want students to actually accomplish. If there's a lot going on, there's too many things, and you don't want them to do all the things, you could just use the instructions to say, take the quiz after you read this article. I do recommend you have them take as many quizzes as they can, because like I said, it makes the personalization work a little bit better. But I personally always recommend it as formative assessment. A lot of teachers ask me, will this automatically pass back the grade to Clever or Canvas or whatever they're using. It does not because of that, because it's meant to be a formative assessment. It's meant to get a pulse on where the student is. And that makes it a little less stressful. It should be something that helps the student have the best experience on Newsela. It should not be something that the student is, nervous about or trying to game, because we want to make sure that it's just informing their experience. Question: after students annotate texts, can they reshare with the teacher or even peers to view or review? So after a student annotates the text, the teacher will be able to see the comments. If they float over the binder and go to assignments, they can click into the assignment, select the student, and they'll be able to see. Their peers will not be able to see those comments. And so that is so that you don't have to worry about moderating comments as a chat function or anything. But the teacher will automatically be able to see those, and they will just be live. Same goes for if you make an annotation as a teacher, it'll automatically show the students in real time. And I've seen teachers use it that way as well. Okay, so we are at time. Want to do a quick shout out if we didn't get to your question, or if you have another question. You can always, if you float over Educator Center and you go down to either support or professional learning, you can continue to get these questions answered. Professional learning is where you're able to access all kinds of resources, especially useful for this time of year, that'll walk you through these things. There's a whole section for getting started, and in fact, a folder of videos for how Newsela works. So if you forget how to annotate, we've got a video for you in here. If you want to learn about read aloud, which we didn't even get to talk about today, you can find a video in here. So I encourage you to check this out. The other thing you can do is you can always follow up with me. Last I checked, a couple people still working on getting correct access and everything. I'll make sure I double check where we are. But if you don't hear, you can email me at ellen.perez@newsela.com. I love to hear from people who have been in my sessions. And so don't hesitate to reach out. I know you have to go. I know we're at time. Thank you so much for making some time to spend with us today. I hope you learned a little bit about Newsela. You are a great group. You asked great questions, and we're a wonderful part of the inquiry. We wish you the best of luck, and we're always proud to support you now and always in your digital instruction and in class instruction when it comes back. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.